Welcome back to Revise and Resubmit, the podcast that takes, those really dense academic papers and makes them surprisingly interesting. I'm Pavlov.
And I'm Nikita.
We've noticed a lot of you are tuning in, which is amazing, but I haven't quite hit that subscribe button yet.
Yeah, and that little button, honestly, it's so small, but it makes such a huge difference in helping us reach more people with these important discussions.
Right. So today we're digging into this really fascinating research paper. It's called Recognition Killed the Radio Star: Recognition Orientations and Sustained Creativity After the Best New Artist Grammy Nomination.
Right. It's by Harrison, Askin, and Hagtvedt from Administrative Science Quarterly 2023. Pretty recent stuff.
And our mission today, we want to figure out how getting that big spotlight early on, like a Best New Artist Grammy nod, how that actually affects a band's creativity over the long haul.
And this paper looks specifically at bands nominated between 1980 and 1990. What's cool is they didn't just look at numbers, they actually talked to band members, used oral histories, and analyzed the music itself.
Okay, so it's a mix of stories and data. Love that. The big question then is, what really happens after that huge early success? Is it smooth sailing, or does it maybe create new problems? Let's get into it.
Well, the first thing the paper stresses is that making creative stuff, especially in a group, is complex. It's fragile is the word they use.
Fragile, okay. So recognition, like a Grammy nom, that's obviously a huge win, right?
Absolutely. It signals you've achieved something major. But, and this is key, it also throws up some potential roadblocks. It's not all positive.
A double-edged sword, kind of.
Exactly. And the paper points out two main challenges. First, bands often aren't really sure what specific part of their work got rewarded. Like, was it the sound, the lyrics, just the vibe? It's hard to pinpoint.
Huh. I never thought about that. You just assume they know.
Yeah, and that uncertainty, it leads straight into the second challenge.
Yeah.
Suddenly you've got way more exposure, way higher expectations from everyone, fans, critics, the label.
And pressure. Huge pressure to do it again.
Immense pressure. And the skills needed to make that first great album might be totally different from the skills you need to, handle fame, deal with scrutiny, make smart career moves. It's a different ballgame.
Right, managing success is different from creating it. So how do bands deal with this? That's where these recognition orientations come in.
Precisely. The researchers found that groups tend to develop these orientations. Think of them as how a band reacts, consciously or unconsciously, to getting famous and all the stuff that comes with it. It's how they sort of look at that success and decide, okay, what now? How do we keep making music?
And it's not like a fixed personality trait, right? It can change.
Yeah, they emphasize it's dynamic. More of a gerund than a noun is the phrase they used, which I like. It's an ongoing thing.
Okay, so what are these orientations?
They identified three main ones: absorbing, insulating, and mixed. Let's maybe start with absorbing.
Absorbing.
Yeah.
Okay, what does that look like?
Well, an absorbing group is one that really starts to internalize all those external expectations. They pay a lot of attention to what the industry, the critics, the fans seem to want.
So they're trying to give people what they think they want?
Kind of. And it often means they open up their creative process to outsiders, maybe bring in different producers, co-writers, trying to find that magic formula again.
Okay, but here's the twist you mentioned.
Yeah.
That doesn't always work out right.
Right. That's the really interesting part. The paper found that these absorbing groups, ironically, are actually less likely to get major recognition again later on.
Wow. Okay, so who's the classic example of this?
The Go-Go's are the main case study they use for the absorbing orientation. Most people know them.
Yeah, we got the beat, our lips are sealed, huge band. So how did they fit this absorbing model?
Well, reports suggest they were genuinely shocked by the Grammy nomination, and they apparently wanted to win so badly. Like, they left the ceremony when they didn't win.
Whoa, okay.
And they even said things like they wanted to be bigger than ABA.
Yeah.
That really shows that focus on external validation, on getting that massive recognition.
So that desire for more success, how did it play out internally? You mentioned internalizing expectations.
Yeah, two things there. First, benchmarking backward. Basically, they started using that first huge success as the yardstick for everything else.
Always trying to top the last hit.
Pretty much. There's a quote in the paper from the Human League capturing this perfectly. "Oh, I bet you can't do that again." The Go-Go's felt that pressure constantly, trying to live up to beauty and the beat. It made their creative process brutal, according to them. Lots of self-criticism.
Okay, benchmarking backward.
Yeah.
And the second thing?
Weighing audience opinions. They became really concerned about what everyone else thought. Fans, critics, the record label. They wanted that approval.
So they might change their sound based on feedback.
The paper suggests that, yeah, they acknowledge that the kind of slicker sound of Beauty and the Beat definitely helped sales, implying they leaned into what worked commercially. And they apparently really wanted that Rock and Roll Hall of Fame induction for a long time. More external validation, you see.
Gotcha. And how did this affect the band itself, like their relationships?
Well, this is the opening relationships part. Internally, it sometimes meant working against one another. That initial unity started to fray.
Fighting.
Well, definitely conflict, especially over musical direction. Like, Belinda Carlisle wanted more pop, Gina Shock leaned more rock and roll, and apparently getting everyone to agree on a song became really difficult.
Sounds tough. And externally, opening relationships meant
letting outsiders in more, finding new voices. They started relying more on the record company producers, hoping they could guide them back to that hit-making formula. Gina Shock said something like, the label would tell them what to do and they'd just do it.
Okay, so they kind of lost some control.
It seems that way. And this led to certain creative practices.
Like what?
Like accelerating work. The label wanted another album fast to keep the momentum going, so they rushed out Vacation.
And that probably didn't help the internal tension.
Not at all. It amplified it, led to burnout, and was a factor in their first breakup. The other practice was recreating old sound. They got a bit stuck trying to replicate the magic of the first album, thinking those classic elements were key. Less room for experimenting.
So, the long-term result for the Go-Go's, as an absorbing group.
Generally, lower productivity and worse critical reception. Fewer albums after the big one, and reviews weren't always as glowing, and there was this feeling of resentment followed by eventual gratitude.
Resentment?
Yeah, resentment at being kind of defined only by those early hits, feeling like later work was overlooked. But then later on, developing gratitude for what that initial success did give them.
Fascinating. Okay, that's a clear picture of absorbing. What about the opposite, the insulating orientation?
Insulating is pretty much the mirror image. These groups tend to push back against those external expectations. They focus much more on their own vision, their own standards for their work.
So they're not worried about being bigger than ABA?
Not in the same way, no. And instead of opening relationships, they do what the paper calls bounding relationships. They keep their circle tight, it's the band members, maybe a few trusted collaborators or advisors, and that's it.
And the payoff for this approach?
The research suggests they're more likely to keep creating consistently over time. The main example here is Sod.
Sod. Okay, smooth operator. How did they fit the insulating model?
Their reaction to the Grammy win was apparently quite different. Surprise, yes, but not that intense focus on winning or needing more awards. Sod Adu herself was reportedly in Germany when they won and didn't make a huge deal about it.
Okay, so less focused on the prize itself. How did they handle expectations? Did they just ignore them?
Not ignore, but they externalized them. Instead of benchmarking backward like the Go-Go's, Sod did benchmarking forward.
Forward, meaning?
Meaning they were focused on what they wanted to do next, creatively. After Diamond Life, Adu said she wanted the band to stretch and come forward, that the first album was done, time to move on. Priority was progress, not repeating the past.
And other people's opinions. Critics, fans.
That's the weighing group opinions part. For Sod, what mattered most was what they thought of their music internally. Adu famously said something like, "The success of the album makes no difference to how we feel about the music itself."
Wow. That's confidence.
It is. Recognition was nice, but secondary to the quality and the artistic integrity, it seems. They valued their fans, but didn't let outside opinions steer the ship.
And the bounding relationships piece. Keeping the circle tight.
Internally, it was about working through one another, a real sense of deep collaboration, intuitive connection. Stuart Matthew Mauman described it as, "We play through each other." Disagreements were about the music, not personal clashes.
And externally, did they shut everyone out?
Not shut out, but carefully managed, keeping trusted voices. They used their success to protect their creative space. They resisted pressure to work with big-name producers if they were happy with their existing team, like Robin Millar. They created this protected, almost church-like zone for creativity.
So what did their actual creative process look like day to day?
More of a steady pacing of work. They weren't rushing things for the label. They took breaks when they needed them, sometimes long breaks, and got back together when the creative energy felt right.
Less burnout, presumably.
Seems likely. And they also focused on experimenting with sound. Because they weren't trying to just recreate a hit, they felt freer to explore different styles, follow their instincts in the studio, not be tied to one genre.
And the results for said long-term?
Pretty much sustained productivity and better critical reception. They kept releasing well-regarded albums even with those long gaps. They never officially broke up. Critics often praised the quality, and there is this sense of gratitude moment by moment.
Also,
Just an appreciation for the ongoing ability to create together, for new ideas sparking, less focus on past glory, more on the present creative act.
okay, that's a really stark contrast to the absorbing groups. Now, the third one was mixed. What's that about?
Mixed is basically for groups that started out absorbing, kind of like the Go-Go's, but then later tried to shift towards insulating, like Sod.
Tried to shift. So it wasn't always successful.
Exactly. The transition can be hard, and often the effects of that initial absorbing phase kind of linger. It's often triggered by something dramatic, like a breakup or a major conflict. The example here is Aha.
Aha, Take On Me. Massive initial splash. How did they start out?
Pretty excited, maybe a bit nervous about the Grammy nomination. One member, Magna Holman, even talked about the band having 3 different careers, which hints at these big shifts.
So they started out absorbing, worried about expectations.
Yeah, initially they seemed quite turned into audience opinions, wanting mainstream hits. Powell Wakhtar Savoy said about getting another top 10 hit later, "We needed that badly." They wanted respect from other musicians too, felt that boy band image hurt them.
Right, the image thing. But then they tried to change,
Oh.
to externalize expectations.
They did try. Later on, they pushed back against the pressure to just make another Take On Me. But they still seemed frustrated sometimes that they weren't always taken seriously as musicians, despite trying to move past that initial image.
And their relationships. Did they try to bound them later too?
Sort of. They started out pretty open to the label's influence, we'll do it, basically. But then they realized maybe they lost their own way a bit. Internal fights, especially over credits, led to a breakup.
Ah,
When they got back together, they aimed to be more self-contained, see AHA as its own thing. But reports suggest those old tensions and expectations of conflict never fully went away.
so a difficult transition. How did their creative habits reflect this mix?
Well, they started with that accelerating work phase for Holman called chaotic but exciting, which led to burnout. Then they tried for a steady pacing, taking breaks, trying to get better.
And the music itself, did they experiment later?
They did show later experimenting with sound, yeah. But there seemed to be this tension, this pull between wanting to explore new stuff and maybe feeling drawn back to that earlier, more successful sound. Morton Harkett mentioned this kind of ambivalence. They saw their later work as different, even calling some of it an elegy for their past, but it was a bit of a struggle.
So what were the outcomes for AHA, this mixed group?
You see, persistent productivity and qualified critical reception. They stayed active longer than purely absorbing groups, definitely, but maybe didn't get the consistent critical acclaim of the insulating ones. Their ability to sort of patch things up allowed for longevity, but those early patterns left a mark. Critics also sometimes had trouble seeing past the early hits.
And the resentment-gratitude thing.
Similarly patterned to absorbing, really. Resentment followed by eventual gratitude. Resentment at the boy band label, feeling pigeonholed, but eventually appreciating what those massive early hits did for them.
It's fascinating how these patterns emerge. You mentioned the paper used quantitative data too, numbers to back this up.
Yeah, and that makes it even stronger. They actually analyzed the music itself, acoustic features like tempo, key, things like that.
What did they find?
They found that the absorbing groups showed less musical variety over time. Their sound stayed more consistent. The insulating groups, much more variety, higher variance in those acoustic measures.
Wow. So Side's music actually changed more than the Go-Go's.
According to this analysis, yes. And the mixed groups, like AHA. They started out less varied, like the absorbing groups, but became more varied later on, matching that attempted shift in their orientation.
That's really compelling. What about just how long they lasted or how many albums they put out?
The numbers supported that too. Insulating and mixed groups were active longer, released more albums than the absorbing groups.
Makes sense. Any other data points?
Future Grammy nominations? Insulating groups gained significantly more nominations after their first one compared to the other two types. And they also looked at Rock and Roll Hall of Fame inductions. Several insulating bands got in.
Right. Did they check if maybe something else explained these differences? Like maybe some bands just had more experience to begin with.
They did look at that. Things like prior band experience, how the group formed, where they were from, how long they'd been together before the nomination, number of members. And none of those things seemed to strongly predict which orientation a band would adopt. It really suggests it wasn't about their starting point, but about how they reacted to that big moment of recognition. That seemed to be the crucial factor.
Okay, so boiling it all down,
Yeah.
what's the big takeaway here?
I think the core message is that dealing with fame, with major recognition, it takes a different skill set than just being creative. And how a group handles that recognition dramatically shapes their future, their ability to keep making art. That recognition orientation, absorbing, insulating, or mixed seems really, really important.
Right. Absorbing means taking it all in, maybe losing your way. Insulating means protecting your vision, focusing inward, which seems to lead to more sustained creativity. And mixed is that tricky path in between.
Exactly. The paper calls it the interpretive burden of recognition. Something that looks totally positive on the surface can actually create real problems down the road if it pulls you too far towards just chasing external validation again.
So early fame doesn't guarantee anything. Might even make things harder, unless you're maybe an insulating type who uses it to gain freedom.
That seems to be the implication, yeah. It's not a simple cause and effect.
And you mentioned they looked at longevity and gratitude too.
Yeah, briefly. The gratitude piece was interesting. Absorbing groups tended to express gratitude looking backward at the past hits. Insulating groups expressed more gratitude for the present moment, the ongoing ability to create. A subtle but maybe important difference in perspective.
Really interesting stuff. Okay, to wrap up this deep dive, what's a final thought for our listeners to chew on?
Well, maybe think about your own life, any field you work in or create in. Have you ever experienced recognition, big or small? How did it feel? And more importantly, how did it affect what you did next? Did you feel pressure? Did you change your approach? Were you absorbing what others thought or insulating your own process? You know, reflecting on that balance, external validation versus your own internal drive is probably crucial for sticking with anything long term and feeling good about it.
And don't forget to subscribe to Revise and Resubmit on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Until next time, keep those minds curious, keep questioning, and keep revising and resubmitting.
आज हम एक बहुत ही दिलचस्प एकेडमिक स्टडी की पड़ताल करने वाले हैं।
हाँ बिल्कुल।
ये एडमिनिस्ट्रेटिव साइंस क्वार्टरली में छपा है, जो कि आप जानते हैं एक टॉप टियर FT50 लिस्टेड जर्नल माना जाता है।
जी हाँ, बहुत प्रतिष्ठित।
और इस शोध का शीर्षक है रिकॉग्निशन किल द रेडियो स्टार। ये स्टडी 1980 से 1990 के बीच के उन बैंड्स पर फोकस करती है जिन्हें बेस्ट न्यू आर्टिस्ट ग्रैमी के लिए नॉमिनेट किया गया था।
मतलब करियर के बिल्कुल शुरुआती दौर में बड़ी पहचान।
हाँ, और शोधकर्ताओं ने उनके पुराने इंटरव्यूज और उनके म्यूजिक आउटपुट, मतलब कितना संगीत बनाया, इसका डेटा देखा है।
और हमारा मकसद क्या है आज?
हमारा मकसद ये समझना है कि जब किसी क्रिएटिव ग्रुप को, जैसे कि बैंड को, करियर की शुरुआत में ही इतनी बड़ी पहचान मिल जाती है, तो उनकी आगे की क्रिएटिविटी पर, मतलब लगातार रचने की क्षमता पर क्या असर पड़ता है।
क्या ये उन्हें और अच्छा करने के लिए प्रेरित करती है या फिर उनकी क्रिएटिविटी को रोक देती है?
हाँ, यही सवाल है। तो चलिए इसे थोड़ा और खोलते हैं।
तो देखिए, दिलचस्प बात यह है, शोधकर्ताओं ने पाया कि ये जो शुरुआती पहचान है ना, ये असल में पूरी क्रिएटिव प्रक्रिया को उलट-पुलट कर सकती है।
उलट-पुलट कैसे?
देखिए, ये पहचान मिलना एक तरह से दो धारी तलवार है। एक तरफ तो ये आपकी उपलब्धि का सबूत है ना?
हाँ, बिल्कुल।
पर दूसरी तरफ ये अपने साथ उम्मीदों का एक भारी बोझ और बाहरी दबाव भी ले आती है, इंडस्ट्री का, फैंस का, सबका।
ओ, तो मतलब जिसे हम सफलता की सीढ़ी समझ रहे हैं, वो एक तरह से फिसलन भरी ढलान भी हो सकती है।
हाँ, कुछ ऐसा ही समझ लीजिए। और इसी दबाव के जवाब में बैंड्स ने 3 तरह के अलग अलग रास्ते अपनाए। शोधकर्ता इन्हें पहचान अभिविन्यास या रिकॉग्निशन ओरिएंटेशंस कहते हैं।
अच्छा, 3 तरह के रास्ते।
हाँ, और यही तय करते हैं कि वो बैंड उस पहचान को कैसे लेता है और उसका असर उनके भविष्य पर क्या होता है।
तो पहला रास्ता कौन सा था? पहला है एब्जॉर्बिंग अभिविन्यास। और शोध बताता है कि ज्यादातर बैंड्स, मतलब 52 में से 27 इसी रास्ते पर चले।
आधे से ज्यादा?
हाँ, ये वो ग्रुप्स थे जिन्होंने बाहरी उम्मीदों को, जैसे इंडस्ट्री क्या चाहती है, फैंस क्या सुनना चाहते हैं, उसको पूरी तरह से कह सकते हैं आत्मसात कर लिया।
मतलब उन्होंने अपने ग्रुप की बाउंड्रीज एक तरह से खोल दी बाहरी असर के लिए।
बिल्कुल। और उनकी जो पिछली सफलता थी वही उनके लिए आगे का बेंचमार्क बन गई।
जैसे द गोगोस का उदाहरण दिया गया है।
लेकिन ये तो सुनने में सही लगता है, बाहरी उम्मीदों को पूरा करना, फैंस को खुश रखना, इससे तो कामयाबी मिलनी चाहिए।
हाँ, सुनने में तो लॉजिकल लगता है, पर शोध का नतीजा कुछ और कहता है।
बिल्कुल। होता क्या है कि ये बैंड्स अपनी जो पुरानी हिट साउंड थी उसी को बार बार बनाने की कोशिश करते हैं।
अच्छा, मतलब सेफ खेलने लगते हैं। हाँ, और काम की रफ्तार बहुत तेज कर देते हैं प्रेशर में। नतीजा, ग्रुप के अंदर झगड़े बढ़ते हैं, लोग थक जाते हैं, बर्नआउट होता है। विडंबना देखिए, जो ग्रुप ज्यादा पहचान चाहते थे वो अनजाने में अपनी ही आगे की क्रिएटिविटी और भविष्य में और पहचान पाने की संभावनाओं को कम कर देते हैं।
अरे,
उनकी प्रोडक्टिविटी गिर जाती है और उन्हें आलोचकों से तारीफ भी कम मिलती है।
तो शोहरत की चाहत ही शोहरत की दुश्मन बन गई, एक तरह से अजीब है।
अच्छा, तो दूसरा रास्ता क्या था?
दूसरा रास्ता है इंसुलेटिंग अभिविन्यास, और ये रास्ता बहुत कम बैंड्स ने चुना। 52 में से सिर्फ 8 बैंड्स।
सिर्फ 8?
हाँ, बहुत कम। ये वो ग्रुप्स थे जो बाहरी उम्मीदों के दबाव से खुद को बचाते थे, शील्ड करते थे।
मतलब वो बाहरी शोर को अंदर नहीं आने देते थे।
बिल्कुल। वो अपने अंदरूनी स्टैंडर्ड्स पर, अपनी क्रिएटिव प्रोसेस पर ज्यादा ध्यान देते थे। उन्होंने अपने ग्रुप की सीमाएं मजबूत रखी, सिर्फ भरोसेमंद लोगों को ही अंदर आने दिया। साडे बैंड इसका एक अच्छा उदाहरण है। पर क्या ऐसे खुद को इंसुलेट करने से वो दुनिया से, अपने फैन से कट नहीं जाते? ये थोड़ा रिस्की नहीं लगता?
देखिए, ये पूरी तरह कटना नहीं है। ये है अपनी क्रिएटिव आवाज को बाहरी दबाव और शोर से बचाना।
अच्छा।
ये समूह अपनी शर्तों पर काम करते हैं, अपनी रफ्तार से। जब उन्हें लगता है कि क्रिएटिव एनर्जी है, तब काम करते हैं।
तो इसका नतीजा क्या हुआ?
नतीजा बहुत सकारात्मक रहा। ये समूह लंबे समय तक टिके रहे, ज्यादा क्रिएटिव काम किया उन्होंने, और मजे की बात यह है कि भविष्य में उन्हें और भी ज्यादा पहचान मिली।
वाह, ये तो बिल्कुल उल्टा है एब्जॉर्बिंग वालों से।
हाँ, वो बाहरी दबाव के बजाय अपने काम के हर पल में एक तरह की संतुष्टि और कृतज्ञता महसूस करते थे।
दिलचस्प। और तीसरा रास्ता, आपने कहा 3 थे? मिक्स्ड। इसमें करीब 17 बैंड्स आए। ये वो समूह थे जो शुरुआत में तो बाहरी दबाव में आ गए, मतलब एब्जॉर्बिंग वाले रास्ते पर चले।
लेकिन बाद में उन्होंने खुद को बचाने की, इंसुलेटिंग बनने की कोशिश की, जैसे एहा बैंड का उदाहरण है।
तो उन्होंने रास्ता बदलने की कोशिश की।
हाँ, कोशिश की, लेकिन वो जो शुरुआती दौर का असर था ना, एब्जॉर्बिंग वाला, वो पूरी तरह गया नहीं, उसके निशान रह गए।
तो उनका क्या हुआ? बीच में रहे?
एक तरह से हाँ, वो एब्जॉर्बिंग समूहों से तो बेहतर टिके और ज्यादा क्रिएटिव भी रहे, लेकिन वो इंसुलेटिंग समूहों जितनी सफलता या वो निरंतरता हासिल नहीं कर पाए।
समझ गए, मतलब वो पूरी तरह खुद को बचा नहीं पाए।
हाँ, उनमें भी वो पिछली पहचान को लेकर थोड़ी नाराजगी और बाद में कृतज्ञता का भाव दिखता है, पर वो इंसुलेटिंग ग्रुप्स वाली स्थिरता नहीं आ पाती।
तो कुल मिलाकर ये शोध हमें क्या बता रहा है? इसका निचोड़ क्या है? मेरे ख्याल से ये साफ कर रहा है कि क्रिएटिविटी पैदा करने के लिए जो हुनर चाहिए,
हाँ,
और उस क्रिएटिविटी से मिली शोहरत या पहचान को संभालने के लिए जो हुनर चाहिए, वो 2 बिल्कुल अलग चीजें हैं।
बिल्कुल, और कभी कभी तो एक दूसरे के बिल्कुल विपरीत भी हो सकती हैं,
है ना?
तो साफ है कि अगर आपको लंबा चलना है, सफलता को बनाए रखना है, तो ग्रुप्स को बाहरी दबाव से खुद को इंसुलेट करना, मतलब बचाना सीखना होगा। और अपनी जो अंदर की रचनात्मक प्रक्रिया है, जो असली चिंगारी है, उस पर ध्यान केंद्रित करना होगा। शायद यही लंबे टिकने और लगातार क्रिएटिव बने रहने की कुंजी है।
ये तो वाकई सोचने वाली बात है। मतलब ये विचार ही कितना अजीब है कि खूब सारी तारीफ मिलना, सराहा जाना असल में आपके काम के लिए नुकसानदेह हो सकता है।
हाँ, बिल्कुल।
और ये बात सिर्फ म्यूजिक बैंड्स पर ही नहीं, शायद किसी भी क्रिएटिव फील्ड में लागू होती होगी, जैसे कोई नया स्टार्टअप हो या कोई रिसर्च टीम हो।
आपने बिल्कुल सही पॉइंट उठाया। ये किसी भी क्रिएटिव ग्रुप पर लागू हो सकता है। और ये एक बड़ा सवाल खड़ा करता है।
क्या?
कि किसी भी फील्ड में जब आपको शुरू में सफलता मिलती है, तो उस पहचान को आप कैसे संभालते हैं? ये आपकी आगे की पूरी यात्रा के लिए कितना निर्णायक हो सकता है। क्या बाहरी वैलिडेशन, मतलब दूसरों की तारीफ पर जरूरत से ज्यादा ध्यान देना, हमेशा आपकी अंदरूनी रचनात्मकता के लिए एक खतरा है?
ये सवाल तो सोचने पर मजबूर करता है। इस गहरी पड़ताल और इन दिलचस्प विचारों के लिए बहुत बहुत शुक्रिया।
शुक्रिया।
उम्मीद है हमारे श्रोताओं को भी इससे सोचने के लिए कुछ नया मिला होगा। और हाँ, अगर आपको इस तरह के एकेडमिक शोध पर आधारित चर्चाएं पसंद है, तो स्पॉटिफाई और एप्पल पॉडकास्ट पर सब्सक्राइब करना न भूलें। अगली बार फिर मिलेंगे एक नए विषय के साथ।